Deep beneath the ashen peaks of Vardenfell, something ancient stirs. Whispers ride the sulphurous winds, carried down from the scorched slopes of Red Mountain, and those who dream too deeply wake up screaming. Morrowind is sick. The land groans under the weight of something it cannot name. Blight storms sweep across the ashlands, spreading disease and madness. Creatures mutate into grotesque reflections of themselves, while minds fracture under the weight of nightmares that do not belong to them. Priests speak of omens, of curses long thought, buried, and of voices calling from beneath the mountain. The dreams are not random, they are deliberate, and the name they carry is always the same. In towns and villages, rumors spread like fire. People claim to hear whispers in their sleep, words in an alien tongue, promises of ascension, commands disguised as prophecy. Scholars lock themselves away, trying to trace the source, and inevitably, they all point toward one place, Red Mountain. A great eye that never closes, a wound on the world that never heals. The Dunmer remember stories told in hushed tones of a house that was struck from the record, of a traitor who disappeared into the earth and was never truly seen again. Official histories say he was dead. The tribunal said he was gone. But now, centuries later, his presence bleeds back into the world, and no amount of denial can hold it back. Pilgrims have started vanishing near the ghost fence. The tribunal grows weaker with every passing year. Gods who once walked among the people are fading, their divinity no longer secure. In their absence, another voice grows stronger. A voice not calling for worship, but for rebirth. Cultists speak of the sixth house as if it never fell, only slept. They gather in caverns beneath the soil, worshipping a dream, awaiting a god who claims to be more than myth. There's something uniquely terrifying about power that doesn't want praise. It wants to remake you, and what's worse is that it might not be madness at all. Something real is happening, something massive, something unstoppable. And as the land fractures under the pressure of what lies beneath, only one question truly matters. Who is Dagoth Ur? Is he a forgotten villain clinging to power? A betrayed god seeking revenge? Or something entirely new, a being born of divine machinery, madness, and prophecy? Whatever he is, one truth becomes increasingly clear. The tribunal failed to stop him, and the dream is no longer sleeping. Red Mountain breathes again, and the voice inside it is calling. Long before the name Dagoth Ur echoed through the dreams of the dying, there was Vorin Dagoth, a proud noble of House Dagoth, born into one of the most ancient and respected lineages of Khmer society. He lived in a time of upheaval, when the Dwemer and the Khmer vied for control of Resdayn, and the future of their people was constantly shifting beneath their feet. Vorin wasn't just another highborn. He was sharp, charismatic, and incredibly ambitious. Even among the Khmer, whose culture prized cunning and resolve, Vorin stood out. He wasn't the kind to chase glory for its own sake, but when he spoke, others listened. When he gave orders, they were followed without hesitation. His house may not have had the same political weight as Indoril or Redoran, but Vorin himself earned a place of influence through sheer presence and ability. His friendship with Lord Indoril Nerevar began not through politics, but through mutual respect. Nerevar, warlord and unifier of the Khmer, saw something in Vorin that others often overlooked, a man with vision, strategy, and unwavering loyalty. Vorin served as both advisor and general to Nerevar, standing at his side during the most critical campaigns of the war against the Dwemer. He was in the thick of every major battle, earning both honor and fear across the land. But behind the battlefield victories and political counsel, Vorin harbored an obsession, a deep curiosity about the nature of power, divinity, and the ancient secrets buried beneath Red Mountain. While the other tribunal members, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sota Sil, were known for their charisma, mysticism, and mechanical brilliance respectively, Vorin preferred to operate in the shadows of knowledge. He would pore over Dwemer texts and delve into ruins that even the most daring avoided. He wasn't just curious, he was driven. He wanted to understand what made the Dwemer tick, what secrets they were hiding beneath their metal cities, and why they were so obsessed with the heart of Lorkhan. Vorin's interest wasn't random. He believed that the heart was the key to something greater, something that could elevate the Khmer beyond their current state. He spoke often, though carefully, of a future where his people would no longer need to bow to fate or the will of capricious gods. In those early years, he never sought to be worshipped or feared. He genuinely thought he could find a path to secure the future of Morrowind. But the deeper he went into the mysteries of the Dwemer, the more distant he became from those around him. Nerevar trusted him, but even he began to question the lengths Vorin was willing to go. The heart of Lorkhan, said to be the literal heart of a dead god, was a thing of legend. The Dwemer claimed to have found it beneath Red Mountain, and Vorin was one of the few who not only believed them, but feared what they might do with it. When Kagrenak, the Dwemer tonal architect, began building his tools to tap into the heart's power, it was Vorin who warned Nerevar first. He didn't trust the Dwemer and believed that their tampering would unravel not just the balance of power in Morrowind, but reality itself. His warnings helped set in motion the events that would lead to the War of the First Council. Through every twist of that war, Vorin remained close to Nerevar. He was not only a strategist, but someone who knew the terrain, the politics, and most importantly, the Dwemer's thinking. And when the Dwemer were finally pushed to the brink, retreating into the deep chambers of Red Mountain, it was Vorin who led the charge to breach their stronghold. What happened next remains debated, wrapped in myth and shadow. What is known is that after Kagrenak used his tools on the heart, the entire Dwemer race vanished in an instant. Gone, as if erased from the world. What role Vorin played in that moment is uncertain, but he was there. And whatever he saw, whatever he experienced in that chamber, it changed him forever. After the battle, he was left to guard the tools and the heart itself. Nerevar trusted him with this enormous responsibility while he went to consult with the tribunal on what should be done. But when Nerevar returned, Vorin had grown defiant. He insisted the heart should be studied and used, not hidden away. The confrontation that followed fractured everything. Nerevar, unwilling to risk the future, demanded the tools be sealed away. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Vorin attacked, others claim he simply refused to surrender. Either way, a conflict erupted. Vorin was defeated, mortally wounded, and left to die beneath the mountain. The tribunal took the tools and later used them on the heart to become gods. But Vorin did not die. The bond he had formed with the heart, even if incomplete, was strong enough to sustain him. Slowly, painfully, he began to change. Vorin Dagoth was no more. What rose in his place would become Dagoth Ur, a figure born not just from ambition or betrayal, but from the very heart of the mountain itself. In the waning years of the First Era, tensions in the land of Resdain reached a boiling point. The fragile alliance between the Chimer and the Dwemer had always been uneasy, held together by necessity rather than trust. On one side stood the proud and pious Chimer, devoted to their ancestors and the Daedra, and on the other, the brilliant but cold Dwemer, a race of atheistic deep elves who trusted only in logic, reason, and the hidden mechanics of the universe. What truly broke the alliance wasn't politics or pride, it was discovery. Deep beneath Red Mountain, the Dwemer unearthed something ancient and incomprehensibly powerful, the heart of Lorkhan. According to legend, it was the literal heart of the god who helped shape Mundus, torn from his chest by the Aedra in punishment and cast down into Nirn. It was thought lost to myth, but the Dwemer, with their unmatched knowledge of deep earth tunneling and tonal architecture, found it buried in the molten core of Vardenfell. And they didn't just find it, they planned to use it. The Dwemer's high engineer, Kagrenak, began designing a series of divine tools, Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard, to tap into the heart's power. His goal was nothing short of godhood, not through worship or belief, but through mathematics and machine. He intended to bind the heart to a massive brass colossus called Numidium, a golem not just of metal, but of metaphysical dominance. With it, the Dwemer could escape the cycle of mortality and claim their place as supreme beings. When word of this project reached the Chimer, it shook the foundation of their society. To the devout Chimer, meddling with the heart of a god was heresy of the highest order. Lord Nerevar, ever the diplomat and warrior, tried to mediate. but the Dwemer would not yield. Vorin Dagoth, who had been studying the Dwemer's activities more closely than most, warned Nerevar that the Dwemer were playing with forces they didn't fully understand. He argued that their tampering could unravel reality itself or provoke divine retribution. What followed was the War of the First Council, a brutal, wide-ranging conflict that pulled in nearly every major faction in Resdayn. The Chimer, led by Nerevar and supported by Vorin Dagoth and the Tribunal, clashed with the Dwemer in a campaign of attrition that saw both sides pushed to the edge. The Nords, sensing weakness and opportunity, invaded from the west, adding a third front to an already catastrophic war. The land was scarred with battle, entire cities were lost, and alliances frayed. Through it all, Red Mountain loomed at the center of the conflict, not just geographically, but symbolically. Everyone knew the heart was there, and everyone knew that whoever controlled it would decide the future of Morrowind. As the war reached its peak, Nerevar led a final assault on the Dwemer stronghold at Red Mountain. It was during this climactic campaign that Vorin Dagoth, commanding a separate vanguard, managed to breach the inner chambers first. He entered the Heart Chamber ahead of Nerevar and the Tribunal, and saw what Kagrenac had built, Numidium, still incomplete, surrounded by the tools, humming with tonal energy, standing in the presence of the heart. What exactly happened in those moments is shrouded in mystery, but what's certain is that Vorin Dagoth came into contact with the heart before anyone else. Whether he used the tools or simply touched the heart in its raw form, he was changed. Something inside him awakened or began to stir. When Nerevar arrived, he found Vorin altered, conflicted, perhaps already affected by the heart's energy. Vorin claimed the tools should be protected and studied, not sealed away or destroyed. Nerevar, ever cautious, disagreed. Kagrenac had already attempted to activate Numidium, and in doing so, caused the total disappearance of the entire Dwemer race. One moment they were there, the next they were gone, every single one across all of Nirn. Nerevar took this as proof that the tools were too dangerous to be left unguarded. But Vorin saw the Dwemer not as destroyed, but as ascended. He believed they had succeeded, even if the cost was beyond mortal comprehension. This disagreement sparked a confrontation. Nerevar insisted the tools be locked away. Vorin resisted. The details are murky, but in the end, Vorin was cast down, left behind as Nerevar and the Tribunal took the tools and departed. Some say he died. Others believe he lingered, hidden beneath Red Mountain, drawing strength from the heart. But in that chamber, something fundamental changed. Vorin had been exposed to power beyond understanding, and that exposure would slowly twist him into something else entirely. The seeds of Dagoth Ur had been planted, not through ambition or betrayal alone, but through proximity to a god's broken heart. He had looked into the divine, and not only survived, but started to transform. And while the world believed the threat buried with the Dwemer, deep beneath the mountain, something ancient had begun to wake. After the final battle at Red Mountain, Resdayn entered a fragile period of silence. The War of the First Council had ended. The Dwemer were gone, vanished from existence in a blink, and with them their ambition to wield godhood through logic and metal. Nerevar stood at the edge of victory, but the cost had been immense. The heart of his homeland was scorched, his enemies had become ash or myth, and his most trusted ally, Vorin Dagoth, had either died in mysterious circumstances or vanished beneath the mountain. The surviving Chimer had little time to process what had truly happened. Red Mountain was sealed, and the divine tools, Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard, were hidden away under the care of the Tribunal, Almalexia, Sothasil, and Vivek. At first, they honored Nerevar's dying wish. But power leaves a taste, and when you've stood in the presence of something like the heart of Lorkhan, that taste lingers. It's here that the cracks in the narrative begin to show. The Tribunal would later claim that after the war, they approached Red Mountain with caution, seeking only to study the tools in secret, believing they could use the heart's power to better serve their people. They spoke of becoming living gods not out of vanity, but duty, to protect the Chimer, to strengthen Morrowind. But this story hinges on what they say happened next, that Dagoth Ur, who had somehow survived, refused to surrender the tools to them, becoming corrupted by the heart and turning on his old friends. The tribunal paint him as a madman, a traitor who clung to stolen power. But that version raises uncomfortable questions. If Dagoth Ur was merely mad and dangerous, why didn't they destroy him immediately? Why did they return later, alone, after Nerevar was dead? And why is the record of what exactly happened at that moment so vague? Some stories say Nerevar died of natural causes. Others whisper he was betrayed. Whatever the truth, one fact remains consistent. After Nerevar's death, the tribunal returned to Red Mountain without him, took the tools, and used them to tap into the heart. They ascended, becoming godlike figures overnight, and Vorin Dagoth, now beginning to be called Dagoth Ur, vanished from the pages of history. Officially, he was dead. But Red Mountain remained closed, and something unnatural began to fester beneath it. There's a version of this story where Dagoth Ur isn't the betrayer, but the betrayed. He had touched the heart first, perhaps even begun a transformation, and he believed himself the rightful guardian of its power. Maybe he feared what the tribunal would become if they used the tools. Maybe he warned them, and they saw him as a threat. Maybe he resisted their plans out of duty, not madness. But the tribunal won that battle. They sealed him away, told the world he had turned against them, and reshaped the narrative to fit their rule. As they took on divine mantles and led the newly named Dunmer people into an era of theocratic rule, Dagoth Ur became a footnote, an inconvenience lost to myth. But the story wasn't over. Deep inside Red Mountain, something was stirring. The heart of Lorcan, still pulsing, still active, began to work on the being who had touched it first. Dagoth Ur, thought to be dead, was merely dormant. The heart sustained him, changed him, merged with him. He didn't die, he transformed. While the tribunal's divine forms were maintained only through repeated rituals and access to the tools, Dagoth Ur's power became something far more intrinsic. He wasn't borrowing godhood, he was becoming it. Slowly, silently, his consciousness returned. He saw what the tribunal had done. He saw the corruption, the blind worship, the stagnation, and he began to plan. From beneath Red Mountain, his dreams extended outward. He reached out to those sensitive to his call, planting whispers in their minds. He spread the blight, a strange divine disease carried by ash storms that warped body and mind. He formed the Sixth House, a cult of dreamers and sleepers, who worshipped him not as a false god, but as a true one, awakened, risen, and just. The tribunal had sealed him away, but they hadn't destroyed him. In fact, they had made him into something stronger. And as their power slowly began to wane, as they distanced themselves from the heart to avoid its toll, Dagoth Ur only grew. The real betrayal may not have been his. It may have been theirs, burying a man they feared would challenge their claim to divinity, a man who had warned them, a man who had touched the heart before they ever dared. And now, the dreams return to Morrowind. The winds carry strange voices. Sleep is no longer safe. Red Mountain stirs, and in its shadows, Dagoth Ur waits. Not as the villain history claims, but as the god history tried to forget. Centuries passed after Dagoth Ur vanished beneath Red Mountain, and the tribunal reigned over Morrowind as living gods. To the people, the tribunal were divine guardians who had brought stability, order, and faith, and their influence stretched from the grand city of Mournhold to the far reaches of Vardenfell. For most of the Third Era, the world had no reason to question that peace. But deep within the mountain, something long thought buried began to wake. At first the signs were subtle. Travelers near Red Mountain complained of headaches, visions, and sleeplessness. Strange creatures, once thought native only to the blighted ashlands, appeared in new places. Then came the blight storms. They rolled down the mountain in unnatural red clouds, thick with choking ash and disease. Crops died, animals mutated, and the winds carried more than dust. They carried whispers. People began to dream. Not regular dreams, but vivid, shared visions of a voice calling to them, guiding them, and promising a return. The name they heard was always the same: Dagoth Ur. His name, which had faded from history, now returned in the form of dreams too powerful to ignore. These weren't isolated events. Whole villages fell under his influence. The infected were called dreamers. Those who heard Dagoth Ur's voice in their sleep and woke changed, vacant, loyal to something they could not see. Some wandered into the ashlands and never returned. Others became his spies, blending in among normal citizens until they were called to action. All the while, the blight spread, faster than the tribunal could stop it. It wasn't just a disease, it was a weaponized force of will emanating from the heart of Lorhan. Dagoth Ur was no longer just a man sustained by divine power. He had fused with it. The heart didn't merely keep him alive, it remade him. His body changed, his mind expanded, and his identity transcended mortality. He was now godlike, not in the way the tribunal claimed to be, but in a literal, overwhelming sense. He spoke in riddles, with a voice that felt ancient and all-seeing. When he addressed mortals, it was as though a dream itself had taken shape, and he wasn't alone. Around him rose the ash vampires, his kin, his generals, his brothers reborn. These were once noble members of House Dagoth, thought lost to time, but now returned as powerful, immortal lieutenants. They spread his influence further, each tied to a region of Vardenfell, guarding key sites and spreading the dream. Then came the sixth house. For thousands of years, House Dagoth had been erased from the great house structure of Morrowind, written off as destroyed after the war of the First Council. But now it returned, not as a political house, but as a cult of pure devotion. It did not seek seats or laws or negotiations. It sought awakening. Its members called Dagoth Ur the true god. They denied the tribunal's divinity, calling them usurpers and liars. To them, Dagoth Ur was not just a savior. He was the only real divine power in Morrowind. The tribunal, once untouchable, now found themselves weakened. Their connection to the heart had long since been severed to preserve their physical forms, but that separation came at a cost. Their power dwindled. They became isolated, fearful, retreating into sanctuaries and relying more on temple bureaucracy than divine intervention. Meanwhile, Dagoth Ur's influence only grew. His plan wasn't limited to Vardenfell. Using the heart's power, he sought to build a godlike construct, the second Numidium or Akulakan. This brass titan, once complete, would make him unstoppable, not just in Morrowind, but across all of Tamriel. He would use it to drive out foreign influence, cast down false gods, and restore a unified vision under his rule. His vision wasn't mere conquest, it was purification. He believed in the myth of a divine race reborn, with all of Tamriel reshaped in his image. His blight would cleanse, his dreams would guide, and all resistance would melt before the will of the heart. And yet, for all his power, his message remained strangely poetic. He didn't just threaten, he preached. He didn't simply demand submission, he offered purpose. He called mortals to wake from the dream of false gods and join him in the true path, and many did. From humble dreamers to corrupted nobles, his reach was insidious, and no one knew who had already fallen under his sway. What made Dagoth Ur so terrifying wasn't just his strength, but how easily he bypassed walls, armies, and politics. He attacked from within, through dreams, through disease, through doubt. And for the tribunal, that meant war was no longer fought on the battlefield, but in the minds and spirits of their people. Vardenfell was no longer just land, it was a battleground between old gods and a new god who had risen from ash and betrayal. Dagoth Ur no longer called himself Vorin Dagoth. That name belonged to a time before betrayal, before transformation. Now he was something else, something more. And as the mountains stirred and the sky turned red, Morrowind faced the slow rise of a power it thought buried. But you cannot bury a god who dreams. you can only hope he doesn't wake up. Dagoth Ur was not just another power-hungry warlord or a delusional god-king rising from the shadows. What made him so dangerous, what truly made him unforgettable, was the fact that he had a plan, and it wasn't born out of madness or chaos. It was precise, terrifying, and strangely noble in its own twisted way. While the tribunal clung to the past and the empire imposed its will through politics and steel, Dagoth Ur dreamed of something far greater, the total rebirth of the Khmer people, not just as mortals who remembered glory, but as immortal beings reborn in divine form. To understand his vision, you have to first understand Corpus. At first glance, it's a horrifying disease. Flesh mutates, minds twist, and the infected lose all sense of who they once were. But Corpus wasn't a punishment to Dagoth Ur. It was a gift, a tool, a new state of existence. He didn't just create it to weaken his enemies. He created it to elevate his followers. Unlike any other disease in Tamriel, Corpus didn't kill you, it changed you. It made you immune to all other disease. It made you immortal. Yes, the body became something grotesque and monstrous, but that was only the beginning. In Dagoth Ur's eyes, this transformation was merely the first step toward a new form of life, a divine life, one where death, decay, and the limits of mortality were cast aside. This was the evolution of the Khmer, a return to power not through worship, but through transformation. His dream wasn't domination. It was salvation from the empire, from the tribunal, and even from the gods. And to complete this transformation, he needed more than just Corpus. He needed Akulahan. Deep within the heart of Red Mountain, Dagoth Ur was building something vast and ancient. A brass giant, stitched together from Dwemer designs and divine energy. This was the second Numidium, Akulahan, the god machine that would not only secure his rule, but unmake the world and rebuild it in his image. It was a continuation of Kagrenak's dream, reimagined with Dagoth Ur's divine touch. Where the original Numidium had served Tiber Septim in crushing entire nations with ease, Akulahan would serve Dagoth Ur by reshaping reality itself. With the heart of Lorkhan pulsing at its core, it would be unstoppable. But brute force was not Dagoth Ur's primary weapon. His strength lay in his ability to spread influence silently, like a whisper in the dark. He didn't send armies across the land, he sent dreams. He entered the minds of the faithful, the weak, the curious. Through dreams he sowed doubt, loyalty, and madness all at once. The sixth house, his resurrected cult, grew in silence and secrecy, with agents scattered across cities, posing as healers, scholars, and priests. They didn't raise banners or storm fortresses. They waited. They converted. And when the time was right, they acted. Some were drawn by fear, others by faith. And some truly believed Dagoth Ur was right, that he had seen something the tribunal had denied, that he could end suffering, bring unity, and erase the shame that had haunted the Khmer since the first council. And perhaps in some ways he was right. The tribunal were weakened, distant, and hypocritical. They preached peace while clinging to stolen divinity. The empire ruled Morrowind as a province, not a partner. Even the Daedra offered only chaos or servitude. Dagoth Ur's promise was different. It was transformation. It was purpose. A future where the Khmer could rise again, not as servants of false gods or pawns of politics, but as a race of divine immortals led by a god of their own making. And despite the horror, the logic was there. If you could survive Corpus, if you could become something more than mortal, wouldn't that be worth the pain? If the world is broken, isn't it just to rebuild it with your own hands? Dagoth Ur's methods were monstrous, but his vision was clear. He believed in a unified people, free from outside rule, a Tamriel purged of weakness, foreign corruption, and mortality itself. The tools were already in place. Corpus to remake the flesh, dreams to control the mind, and Akulakan to reshape the world. All he needed was time. and the longer he remained hidden within the mountain, the stronger he became. The tribunal couldn't stop him. The Empire barely understood him. Only one figure, a reincarnated soul wrapped in prophecy, could stand in his way. But Dagoth Ur wasn't afraid. He had seen it in the dreams. Everything was going according to plan. And soon, the world would wake to a new dawn, one bathed not in sunlight, but in ash and divine purpose. By the time Dagoth Ur's plan was nearing completion, the tribunal was broken and the people of Morrowind were caught in a storm of ash, prophecy, and fading faith. The blight spread faster, dreams became more invasive, and the sixth house was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was an open wound at the heart of the land. Amid this chaos, something ancient stirred. The prophecy of the Nerevarine, long buried and quietly feared, began to surface again. Among the Ashlanders, the old songs spoke of Nerevar's return, not as a memory, but as a living soul reborn to confront the sins of the past. And somewhere in the Imperial-occupied land of Vardenfell, a prisoner stepped off a boat. No one knew their name. No one could have guessed their fate. But the gods, or fate, or something older, had chosen them. This was the Nerevarine, the long-awaited rebirth of Indoril Nerevar, the one figure Dagoth Ur might have truly feared, or perhaps respected. From the very beginning, the journey was one of unraveling lies. The tribunal, still worshipped by many, were hollow echoes of their former selves, drained from years of fighting Dagoth Ur and weakened by their dependency on the heart's power. Vivek, the warrior poet, remained enigmatic and powerful, but even he could not hide the fear in his words when speaking of Red Mountain. Almalexia and Sotasil had drifted into isolation, their sanity and motives unclear. The Nerevarine, carrying no memories of their past life but guided by prophecy, had to navigate this broken world, piecing together ancient truths. Each step took them deeper into the hidden history of Morrowind, from the ash-choked caves of the Sixth House to the tombs of long-dead heroes. They uncovered the nature of Kagranak's tools, Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard, the very instruments used by the tribunal to seize divinity and by Dagoth Ur to sustain his unnatural life. The tools were more than relics. They were the keys to ending the nightmare. The gods had lied. The Empire did not understand. And Dagoth Ur waited, deep within Red Mountain, confident in the strength of his vision. The final confrontation was not just a battle, it was the fulfillment of a cycle. The Nerevarines' journey ended where it all began, within the heart chamber at the summit of the mountain. Akulahan stood incomplete, immense, and humming with unnatural energy. Dagoth Ur greeted the Nerevarine not as an enemy but as an old friend. He didn't rant or rage. He spoke with calm conviction, laying out his plan one last time, offering unity, immortality, and purpose. But the moment for choice had passed. The battle was brutal and strange, fought not just with blade and spell, but with the weight of history behind every strike. Dagoth Ur was not invincible, but he was more than mortal, and the heart of Lorkhan pulsed behind him, feeding him power with every moment. Yet the Nerevarine was armed with Wraithguard, protected against the heart's power, and holding Sunder and Keening, the only tools capable of unmaking the divine. And one by one, the conduits were destroyed. As the heart weakened, so too did Dagoth Ur. His body, his mind, even his godlike voice began to unravel. The final blow was not just a victory, it was an unraveling of centuries of ambition, pain, and corrupted divinity. With the heart destroyed, the source of Dagoth Ur's power was gone. Akula Khan fell silent. The tribunal, already faltering, would begin to fade, and Dagoth Ur, who had lived through betrayal, madness, and transformation, was no more. But what followed was not celebration. The blight lifted, but so too did the structure that held Morrowind together. The Nerevarine, though hailed as a hero, did not stay to rule. Their task was never to lead, only to end what had been allowed to fester for far too long. And as they disappeared into legend, the people of Morrowind were left with questions no prophecy could answer. What had they truly lost? What had they really saved? The return of Nerevar did not restore the old world, it ended it. The gods were gone, the blight was gone, Dagoth Ur was gone, and what remained was a wounded land, waiting for something new to rise from the ash. When the smoke cleared and the heart of Lorkhan was destroyed, Dagoth Ur fell into legend almost instantly. His body perished, his fortress crumbled, and the curse that plagued the land, Corpus, blight storms, the Sixth House cult, began to dissipate. The tribunal, already weakened from centuries of conflict and dependency on the heart's divine energy, unraveled shortly after. Sotasil and Almalexia met tragic ends, and Vivek vanished from the world, leaving behind only silence and questions. But for all that ended with Dagoth Ur's defeat, something remained unresolved. For some, he was a megalomaniac who tried to enslave the world through madness and disease. For others, he was a tragic figure, deeply broken, yet strangely sincere in his vision. He didn't want to rule Tamriel like a conqueror. He wanted to change it forever. Dagoth Ur believed the gods were false, that the tribunal had betrayed the ideals they once stood for, and that Morrowind's destiny wasn't to kneel to outside forces like the Empire or to worship weakened gods, but to rise as something greater. He saw the heart of Lorkhan not as a tool of conquest, but as a means of salvation. He wanted to create a new race of immortals, beings immune to disease and death, a reborn chimera free from the bounds of mortality. His creation of Corpus, while horrifying, wasn't mindless evil. He saw it as the next step in evolution, a gift rather than a curse. Even his actions against the tribunal weren't just vengeance. He viewed them as usurpers, wielding power they didn't deserve. From his perspective, they had stolen what was meant for the people and turned their backs on Nerevar's legacy. Dagoth Ur's plan was terrible in its consequences, but disturbingly logical in its design. He didn't rely solely on force or terror. He reached into minds through dreams, seducing people with visions of unity, strength, and purpose. His cultists didn't just follow out of fear. They believed in him. They whispered his name with reverence, because in their eyes he wasn't just a god, he was their savior. But was he truly mad? Or was his madness simply a symptom of the divine power he wielded for too long without stability? Did his contact with the heart twist him, or did it amplify something already inside him? Thorin Dagoth, once a noble of House Dagoth and trusted advisor to Nerevar, had always shown signs of brilliance and ambition. But once he was left alone with the heart, once he made contact with that impossible source of power, everything changed. He stopped being mortal. He stopped being Thorin. And what came after might not have been madness. It might have been what happens when someone touches the divine without limitation. Even in death, questions linger. Some fans believe Dagoth Ur didn't truly die, not in the way mortals understand it. When the heart was destroyed, his physical form disintegrated, but his influence had already seeped into the fabric of Morrowind. Dreams were his domain, and in the deep places of sleep, his voice was never silenced. Some speculate that he became something akin to a myth, a lingering thought form that might one day return if belief in him is reignited. Others suggest that the tools used to destroy the heart didn't erase him, but severed his tether to the physical world, leaving his essence adrift, half forgotten, half remembered, waiting in the dreamscape. In Elder Scrolls lore, death is rarely final for figures of mythic significance. The way gods and heroes persist through worship, memory, and myth means Dagoth Ur could still exist in some abstract form, even if only as a shadow in the collective unconscious of Morrowind's people. After all, he was the dreamer. And in dreams, time doesn't pass like it does in the waking world. There's no certainty, no closure. His plan failed, the heart was lost, and his name became something people feared to speak aloud. But that doesn't mean he's gone. It only means he sleeps. And if there's one thing everyone learned in the Third Era, it's that dreams can be dangerous. So when people say his name in whispers, or when strange dreams return to the Ashlands, some wonder if Dagoth Ur is truly gone, or if the dreamer is just waiting to wake again. He was many things to many people. a monster to the tribunal, a messiah to his followers, a nightmare to the empire, a puzzle to the scholars. But behind the mask, beneath the godhood, before the madness, there was Vorin Dagoth, a man of House Dagoth, once respected, once loyal, and perhaps once noble. He stood beside Nerevar, fought in his wars, helped shape the very course of Velothi history. He wasn't always the villain of the tale. That came later, after Red Mountain, after the war with the Dwemer, after the Heart. His fall wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, quiet unraveling, buried in forgotten chambers and sealed tombs. And when he returned, he didn't come back as a broken shell or vengeful ghost. He came back as something new. Dagoth Ur did not just awaken from the mountain, he became the mountain. He wrapped himself in ash and stone, claimed the divine power the tribunal had stolen, and began to dream a new world into being. It was a vision both terrifying and strangely beautiful. A Morrowind free from foreign rule. A people uplifted, no longer fragile, no longer bound by death or weakness. It's easy to call him mad when you see the blight, the corpus monsters, the nightmare cults. But the deeper you look, the harder it is to say where madness ends and belief begins. He wanted to build a new god from the bones of the old. He called it Akulakan, a second Numidium, powered by the heart, meant to reshape the world itself. It wasn't just ambition, it was faith. The kind of faith only a fallen friend could hold. And that's the part people struggle with most. Dagoth Ur wasn't just a villain with grand plans. He was someone the heroes once trusted. He was there when the tribunal chose to defy the gods. He knew what they became, and what they gave up to stay in power. So when he called them false gods, it wasn't just slander. It was truth wrapped in rage. When the Nerevarine arrived, it wasn't just the climax of a quest. It was a reckoning centuries in the making. The prophecy of the incarnate, the long-forgotten promises of Azura, the old scars of betrayal, all of it collided in the heart chamber. And there, surrounded by fire and stone and divine relics, it wasn't just good versus evil. It was belief against belief, legacy against legacy. Dagoth Ur stood tall and defiant, believing in his cause until the very end. Even as the heart was destroyed, even as his body withered and his plans crumbled, he believed. And maybe that's why his story lingers. Not because of the power he wielded or the horrors he unleashed, but because of the conviction that drove him. A conviction so deep it rewrote his soul. So what was he, really? A tyrant? A savior? A victim of divine corruption? Maybe all of them. Maybe none. That's the thing about Dagoth Ur. He doesn't fit into clean boxes. His legacy isn't neat. His voice, even now, echoes through the ruins of Red Mountain, through old dreams, through ash-covered temples. Some believe he's gone. Others think his essence lives on, waiting, watching, whispering in the minds of those who still dream too deeply. And what if the heart still beat? What if the Nerevarine had chosen differently? Would Tamriel be ashes or something unrecognizable but new? Would House Dagoth rule from a place of harmony or horror? These aren't questions with clear answers. But that's part of what makes his story so unforgettable. Dagoth Ur was a villain, a prophet, a relic, and a god. But above all, he was a reminder that the line between salvation and damnation is drawn by those who survive. The tribunal told their version, the Nerevarine fulfilled theirs. But in the end, Dagoth Ur's truth never really died. It just fell silent, for now. So if the heart still beat, if dreams could live again, if Red Mountain called your name, would you follow him? Would you believe? Or would you run from the dream before it wakes?